Okay, so in the last episode, we went over some lost episode creepypasta wikis, and we read one that was a Loud House creepypasta, and it referenced a haunted Max and Ruby DVD, or a story about one. And I found a Max and Ruby creepypasta, but it wasn't the one they were referencing. Apparently, the correct one is this one, Max and Ruby 0004 from GeoShea's Lost Episodes Wiki. And this will actually be my second time reading this because I read this before, like a few minutes ago. I had like 40 minutes worth of like video, not including this one. Like I was reading a different story too, and I found out I didn't have my microphone set up. I read this whole thing in like a spooky voice, and I was like, oh man, I'm glad I got that done. Like, no, I'm glad to do it again. So thankfully this story isn't that long. I read a different one from the another one from the Clay March wiki, which is the same place that I read the Max and Ruby's Afternoon Snack creepypasta, and I'm good with not reading that one again. Something that I found interesting, these categories. Who lives in a pineapple under the sea? SpongeBob SquarePants. Absorbent and yellow and porous is he? SpongeBob SquarePants. If poot butt be poopy, you're fucking asshole. You are a asshole. Then shit in your pants and dance in it. You're a asshole. And see, just some intros. My favorite one. Someone took forever making this, so stop adding shitty categories, you motherfuckers. Or you tell this is a fantastic community. Without further ado, let's read the Max and Ruby creepypasta. I'll try my best to do the same voice as I did the first time, but I mean, it really did a toll on me doing it that first time, so I'll see how far I can get. It was just this Christmas that went by, and things were getting busy. I'd started buying presents for the whole family, and I had just finished shopping, but I still needed to grab a present for my little cousin. She is not very hard to shop for since my cousin is 4. She likes things like Peppa Pig and My Little Pony. She really liked, and I say liked for a reason, Max and Ruby. When I decided to go looking for a present, I figured something like a Max and Ruby DVD would have been perfect, since she liked to watch it on a daily basis. However, Christmas meant that many of the online DVDs were sold out in most places. I went to look on eBay as well, but I figured I could not trust what condition the DVDs would have been in. So I was stuck in a rut for a while until that package arrived. I was at home, still scrolling for a stupid DVD, when I heard the sound of something being pushed into my letterbox. I caught a hold of it before my dog did and looked at the package. It seemed to be wrapped fairly badly, though looked like grease marks and stains on it. Naturally, as anyone would, I decided to open the package. Inside was something that I could not explain. It was a Max and Ruby DVD, but I had never seen one like it online. It was like some little kid had drawn on the front cover with a marker. The title was just Max and Ruby, with what looked like poorly drawn illustrations of Max and Ruby on the front. There were no names or anything, but on the back it had a list of 4 episodes with blunt titles. 1. Episode 0001. 2. Episode 0002. 3. Episode 0003. And 4. Episode 0004. I quickly gave the DVD a watch over. To my surprise, all the episodes were in perfect quality and seemed to have no flaws. It was as if it was a real DVD, just with a homemade cover. The only thing I thought appeared to be odd was the episode selection screen. The episodes had names, but they were all titled Max and Ruby 1, with their numbers being changed as if it went down the list. The actual selection screen was just a plain white screen with black text and nothing else. After giving it much thought, I decided to change the cover to something a little nicer by printing out a DVD cover that I had found on Google and tracked down. The names of the episodes today were labeled correctly. So I let the episode list screen alone because I figured it was self-explanatory. Christmas went by and things were fine. I gave my little cousin her DVD and she was happy with it all throughout Christmas. But that was only because she hadn't watched it yet. On Boxing Day, the family had gone out for lunch and left me to babysit my cousin. I was not too bothered about being left at home. I figured now is a good time to put on her DVD for her. I had put the DVD in and allowed it to play. While I was in the kitchen eating my dinner, from what I could hear, she had watched episodes 1 to 3 so far. I was just about to finish off my noodles when I heard my cousin screaming from the other room. Dropping everything, I had run into my living room and saw my cousin curled up on the floor, screaming. I looked up at the TV and I felt my heart in my throat. What I caught a glimpse of was one of the most horrifying things I'd ever seen. It was what appeared to be a frame of Max and Ruby standing next to each other in complete darkness. But what made it so horrible was their lack of faces. They had lost their noses and mouths, and their eyes were replaced with big black holes. The colors were a disgusting blood red, and there was a faint static in the background. The sound was replaced with what sounded like the Max and Ruby theme, playing backwards, with a faint sound of static in the mix of it all. It had to be the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen, and it must have been on the screen for at least 20 seconds before the screen went black and our television set turned off. Which alone was weird because TVs don't usually turn off by themselves. I was able to calm my cousin down, telling her it wasn't real, and she had just had a nightmare as she'd fallen asleep in front of the TV. However, I knew in my mind it was completely real. My parents had rung me up and told me they were going to be out all night, so this was going to be my best opportunity to look at the DVD more closely. I didn't mention it to them, and as soon as they hang up, I grabbed the DVD before opening it on my laptop. As soon as it loaded, I noticed that episode 4 had now been replaced with Rest in Peace, Mommy, and Daddy, which sent a deep chill down my back. Since my cousin was now asleep, I plugged in my earbuds so she can sleep without having to hear anything. Normally an episode of Max and Ruby features 3 short stories, but this episode only had 1. It started off quite happy. Max and Ruby were playing tag in the garden, and their parents were on the porch watching them play. However, something was off. The sound was playing in reverse, and the parents' faces were that of sadness. It panned to the mother and father, and in a voice of deep sorrow the father spoke. "It's such a shame," he sighed. It then cut short to the sound of static and a loud scream, followed by the sound of 2 people choking. The sounds felt so real, it almost made me physically sick. The scene then switched to both Max and Ruby standing in front of what looked like a gravestone, labeled Rest in Peace, Mommy, and Daddy. The 2 of them had no faces. At this point, there was also no sound, apart from the faint static. The scene remained on screen for about 1.5 minutes before it cut away to black. It then changed scene again, now showing Max and Ruby sitting in Ruby's room. Both of them were sobbing. The sobs were so realistic and heart-wrenching that it almost sounded like it was recorded from a real person mourning. What happened next was probably the most disgusting yet saddest thing I've ever witnessed. The scene had changed to Max sitting in his room. He was standing on a chair with a noose hanging from the ceiling. He placed the noose around his neck. My computer screen faded to black as the static got louder. Almost instantly, it then cut to Ruby walking in on her brother. She let out a horrific scream as the background turned black. The camera was panned on her face as the sound of a chair being kicked and the same choking from before began to play. The picture of Ruby's face stayed on screen for a good 5 minutes. This time, her eyes had returned as the same gaping holes. Ruby then started crying. As before, there were no other facial features. The static slowly grew louder and drowned out the sound of her cries. The scene cut to black with a loud static. When the screen returned, Ruby was standing, now on her own, in the garden by 2 gravestones. One was labeled, Rest in Peace, Mommy, and Daddy, and the other, Rest in Peace, Brother. At this point, I had already been sick and was sitting all shaken. The episode seemed to have come to an end at last, as an old computer noise started playing. I was about to eject the DVD when the same image came up like it did on the TV. This time, however, there was text above the 2 rabbits which said, "Death is our only release." There were no credits or anything else. It stayed on this for a few seconds before the DVD finally popped out of my laptop. I sat there, trying to contemplate what had happened. In my shock and fear, I made the foolish decision to break the DVD up as much as I could before leaving the house. Afterward, I shoved the pieces down the drain. Thankfully, I kept a few screenshots and saved them to my laptop. The next couple of days went past without anything unusual happening. I had a few nightmares about the DVD, but luckily that was all. My cousin had gone back home along with the rest of her family. It was a late night. My parents had gone out for dinner, leaving me to watch TV. I heard what sounded like someone posting something through the door. At this point, the DVD had left my mind since I hadn't told anyone about it. However, it all came flooding back when I looked down at the letter in front of me. It was just messily folded up and said, "Death is our only release." Alright, that was Max and Ruby 0004. I can tell that this is probably one of those earlier creepypastas. At least it gives off that kind of vibe, you know, kind of like around the Squidward Suicide kind of era. And, because these kind of things have, you know, some pretty basic stuff, you know, like characters with black holes for eyes, videotapes showing up out of nowhere, distorted music and static, just, you know, usual tropes that you've kind of gotten used to. But I feel like this stuff was pretty good for what it was at the time. I remember thinking, like, when I first read Squidward Suicide, I thought it was like the scariest thing ever. I don't remember ever being that scared from something. And I think that was just because this kind of realm of online horror was pretty new at the time. You know, I think it was a lot of people who didn't have much exposure to horror like this. I feel like most exposure people would have would be something like, you know, Scream or like Friday the 13th, which have their moments, but for the most part are kind of, I mean, I love those movies. It's just, you know, for the most part, they're not really like creepy, I guess. I think people are more focused, like people had more experience with scary things. So experiencing something like, you know, like this or like Squidward Suicide or something like that, it was something that was a bit different. It was more in the creepy realm. And there, of course, were things before this that would be in that category, but I feel like this was probably people's first exposure to it. So it was, you know, this was new. This was new territory. People hadn't seen stuff like this. It was very exciting. It was very creepy. People didn't have a tolerance for it. I don't know. This could be something that was recent, but at least it gives, to me, it reminds me a lot of like earlier creepypastas, like, you know, Smile Dog and stuff like that. So, I don't know, this is pretty nostalgic for me, so I really enjoyed it. And anyways, let me check something out before we move on to something else. What happened to Face? Max and Ruby, no Face! Oh, heck no! Max and Ruby 004 possessed puppy! Can I tell, this is a great place to be. So this is Peppa Pig finale, and two things really caught my attention with this one. One, Peppa Pig with her cool sunglasses. I can already tell I'm gonna love this. And another thing, the tags. Peppa Pig is a useless little bastard. Go fuck yourself, Peppa Pig. And then it's in the SpongeBob category. And fucking trash. Actually, I want to kill me, not scary, death. Funny pasta does not equal cliche pasta. Peppa Pig. DDD, that's from the, okay. Sus. Rip off. Rest in peace, Doki. I did not come up with this lol's least favorite creepypasta. Wow. Okay, so let's give this a try. Apparently has some credibility. It was 3 a.m. My parents were out, and I was home alone. My 7-year-old self decided to watch a bit of Discovery Kids before nap time. You see, Discovery Kids used to have these classically satisfying shows like Bob the Builder, Jelly, Thomas the Tank Engine, you name it. It also has more Argentine fanatics. As I found the channel number, Peppa Pig somehow sped up to reach the TV. That typical intro played as usual. But there was something off. George Pig refused to be in the intro, as he shaked his head and sprinted straight back to his original position. Mommy and Daddy Pig, Peppa and George's parents, were also not here. The title card said, "The End." I was plainly confused about this since there is no title card in Peppa Pig. Oh wait, there is. It started with Peppa on her bed, the camera facing her back as she turned around. A very twisted smirk was left on her face. With her, the releasing very organ, and such elongated fangs. She slowly tucked herself out of bed, still looking at the audience with that sinister smile. As she ran to the living room, Mommy and Daddy Pig were present. Peppa said she had a big surprise for them, and told them to close their eyes until she said so. The screen cut to black for a few seconds, to let the audience hear some twisted pig shrieks along with what sounded like George's crying. However, George was now like if he was bawling, in immense pain. No, not like that usual crying he blurts out. Finally, this is where trauma kicks in. The kitchen could be visible, with what looks like Peppa consuming bacon? Ain't that not cannibalism? Another scene where it cuts to Peppa in George's bedroom was there. George on his bed with what looks like tears streaming down his eyes. In front of me was a note saying, "Now that Mommy and Daddy Pig's fleshes have been feasted on by me, you're next." Correct? I was dumbfounded seeing that, since I never expected that Peppa actually went to feast on her own parents. The last thing I saw of the television was Peppa herself, but with completely void converted eyes, along with the drawn-out sounds of pigs shrieking. It felt endless, but it didn't last long anyway. I don't say I could possibly dislike that. That was the best story I've ever read. That was fantastic. I really liked the part where she ate the bacon. That was, Alright, next story. This is The Amazing World of Gumball, of the Grieving. And according to the tag Awesome Articles and this thing that says it's an ultra quality article, I'm led to assume that this is probably one of, if not the best stories on this website. So might as well read it, give it a try. I'm not going to do the dumb spooky voice that I did for the Max and Ruby creepypasta because it wasn't worth it. It just put way too much strain on my throat and it didn't even sound that good. So we're just going to try to read this normally. I've always loved Cartoon Network as a kid. As I was growing up, it was my all-time favorite channel to watch. Even today it has some good shows like Adventure Time and Regular Show. One of the newest shows on the network, The Amazing World of Gumball, is a cute and mildly entertaining show. Not really my cup of tea, it's a little immature, but my little brother seems to like it a lot. One night I was watching Adult Swim and I realized that I'd been up so late I hadn't even kept track of time. It was already 4 a.m. I don't recall ever watching Adult Swim this late, so I stayed awake to see what would happen when it ended. A little bumper showed up at the bottom of the screen during a commercial break. It said that a special episode of The Amazing World of Gumball was about to come on. I was a little confused about an episode of a very popular new show coming on this early, but I was bored and I decided I would watch it, thinking it might come on later in the day so I could spoil it for my little brother. Sort of mean, I know. The flashy and energetic intro theme played, although it was played a little differently than I recall. The music was a little different, and the show's logo wasn't animated. Its colors were done rather sloppily as well, almost like something a little kid would do on a doodle board or a glow board. I ignored it, assuming it was done for this special episode. The title of the episode was The Grieving. A sort of sad title, but I didn't really pay too much attention. It began with Gumball, the show's 12-year-old protagonist, standing alone facing a corner of his dimly lit classroom. He looked absolutely miserable, a far cry from the cheerful demeanor he usually had. There was no one else in the room, not even his best friend and adopted brother Darwin the goldfish, and the windows in the room clearly showed the night sky outside. I was really starting to get confused. Why would he be at school at night? And why was he standing in the corner all sad and alone? After what seemed like a minute of Gumball standing somberly in the corner, The scene suddenly changed. We were in Gumball's house. Once again, the scene is silent and a little disquieting. Richard Gumball's enormous rabbit father walks in the kitchen. He looked even more miserable than Gumball had in the previous scene. Richard isn't wearing his usual attire. He's dressed in a fancy black suit. A little uncharacteristic of him, as he's usually a slob. He sighs and slumps down onto the sofa and starts sobbing intensely, sounding like someone who had just lost something important. I was starting to get a little creeped out. Where was the silly, fun cartoon that I usually look forward to watching with my younger brother? This was something completely different. I was beginning to think that this might have been something the creators did as an experiment or something, a test of the animation or sound perhaps. Though, it couldn't have been. Aside from the opening theme, which was still different from the final shows, the episode had been much quieter than it usually was. Only subtle sounds and very little music, and the animation was not anything to write home about either. It was done a bit like an amateur Flash or Newgrounds. The character designs were somewhat sloppy and rushed looking, and the real-life backgrounds used for the show looked different. As confused and somewhat frightened as I was, for some reason, I kept watching. Poor Richard was still sobbing on the sofa, as the front door opened suddenly, making me jump a bit at such a loud noise. And Gumball's mother, Nicole, a blue cat like him, stepped in. Like Richard, she wasn't wearing her usual outfit. For some reason, she was in a black dress and was wearing a pretty black hat to match. Nicole sat down on the couch to comfort her husband, although she was looking a bit saddened herself. By this point, Richard's crying had begun to get more pained and miserable sounding. This wasn't the normal cartoon crying on the show. This was realistic and almost depressing crying. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the sad scene at their home ended, and they shifted back to the school. We weren't in Gumball's classroom this time. We were in Principal Brown's office. Nicole and Richard were there in their usual clothes, looking more normal and happy than they had before, but still slightly worried. Principal Brown, however, looked extremely sad. He quietly and somberly informed them that their children, Anise and Darwin, were not present after lunch earlier that day. They hadn't been seen at all the rest of the day. Nicole was instantly furious at him. She began spouting various fucks and calls at him I don't think would have made it into a mature program like regular show. I was laughing at this because it seemed sort of funny for Nicole to flip out in this manner and start swearing like a sailor in a G-rated cartoon, but my outlook soon changed when Principal Brown told her something else after she had finally quieted down. His eyes began to tear up as he informed them that they were eventually found, but they had not been found alive. He then went into graphic and nearly nauseating detail describing how their bodies were found, their parents sitting in utter shock. I could hardly believe what was happening. How could such a cheery and fun kids show be taking such a dark and twisted turn? I was considering turning the TV off, but I was too scared to be left in the dark by now, nearly frozen by fear and disturbed intensely at the terrible things he was saying. Another flashback. The scene was earlier that day, and the animation in this scene was even worse than earlier. I don't remember it very clearly, but I think he began his recollection by saying that the school had called the police department when they first turned up missing, believing that the kids had simply ran off and decided to skip school. They said it was very uncharacteristic of both Darwin and Anais to go skipping school like delinquents. Darwin was a little naive and a bit ditzy, but he was a good kid and wouldn't have even dreamed of doing something like that. And Anais was even less likely to run away. She was a straight A student despite being only 4, which also troubled the police, seeing as a defenseless 4-year-old was missing as well as an older boy. The school had been thoroughly checked, so the police started to search the heavily wooded area outside of the school. It took little time for the police to discover the horrifying fate of Anais. In a small clearing outside of the school, Anais's head was found in a small box. You likely would have expected something like that to be shown in the show's cutesy art style, but it was nothing like that at all. Realistic blood covered the box inside and out. While Anais's head was done in normal style, but was drenched in blood and some other fluids, not all of them hers apparently. There was a note in the box, seemingly written in her blood. It was never stated during the episode what exactly was written on the note, but it apparently led to the rest of the remains in Darwin's heavily mutilated corpse. What I remember most about this scene was how out of place it seemed. All the blood and gore from Darwin and Anais' slaughtered and dismembered remains was done in a very realistic and disturbing way. It looked like the scene had been taken from a crime scene photograph done by a professional, not from some cartoon. The way this scene was animated was different from most of the show as well. You may know that the characters from the series are done in vastly different animation styles, from flash animation to CGI. I think there's even a character done by someone putting their chin upside down to make a face. This particular scene wasn't like anything I'd ever seen on the show before. Every little detail in Darwin's face was clearly illustrated. He looked like a little zombie. His face was very pale, his eyes had been gouged out by someone. Anais fared no better, or what was left of her anyways. She was naked and her stomach had been slit open. Her intestines were strewn around the trees and bushes in the woods, once again in a very morbid and realistic style. I was very ill by the time the incredibly disturbing flashback had come to an end, so I quickly ran to the bathroom to vomit. I was feeling better after upchucking, so I'd realized that I had good timing and ran to the bathroom during a commercial. It was then that I noticed the show had been running twice as long. It usually ran for 11 minutes, but this episode was running for about 30. By then I was wondering if there's any information on The Grieving on IMDb or something, so while the commercials were still playing, I looked up some information about this episode on Google. Nothing came up. No information remotely similar to the plot or name of this episode existed anywhere. Now incredibly scared and wondering if anyone else was watching, I quickly dialed up my brother Larry and asked him to turn on Cartoon Network and see if he was seeing the same shit that I was. He was pretty mad that I woke him up at this hour, but he's a nice guy and told me that he would see for me. I thanked him and stayed on the line as the show came back on for commercial break. The scene had thankfully panned away from the sight of the children mutilated and was back to the principal's office. I asked Larry if he saw the same cartoon animals talking or crying since that was what they were doing on my TV. To my surprise, he said that he saw nothing like that. Instead, it was a rerun of an old Looney Tunes short. In utter shock, I dropped the phone and ran over to the TV to turn it off, and as hard as I pressed the buttons, it would not shut off at all. I tried every single button and none of them did a thing. I tried unplugging the whole thing as well, but nothing worked. The TV stayed on no matter what. Larry hung up, assuming that I was playing a joke or something, I guess. And I was alone once again. My door was locked from the outside somehow, and the door to my bathroom was now locked as well. It seemed that I had no choice but to call the police since my other family members were gone that night. It was the reason I could stay up so late to watch Adult Swim in the first place. When I hurriedly dialed the number, I accidentally dropped my cell phone into my cup of Pepsi. I was very scared and had no choice but to finish the episode. I turned on all the lights in my room and got under the covers, hiding like my little brother does when I make him watch scary movies with me. I had apparently missed out on a little bit, but Gumball's parents were still talking to Principal Brown, so not that much. Nicole was asking him if Gumball was alright, apparently, since she hadn't remembered him when the principal had told her what had happened to Darwin and Anais. He looked slightly confused and shocked for a moment and explained to her that he thought Gumball was out sick today, and that he had spent the day at home by himself with the stomach bug. Nicole screamed and wailed while Richard quietly told him in a very out-of-character voice that they thought Gumball had got on the bus this morning, but it didn't seem that way. The police were called once again to search the building and the small forest outside of Elmore Junior High. They had found him in Miss Simeon's classroom, hanging by a noose with a blood-covered knife behind him, and blood covering his clothing. The episode ended with the shot of Gumball's dead body hanging there in the corner, fading to black. The credits rolled silently. Not the usual way Cartoon Network annoyingly airs a promo that squishes half the scene. These credits rolled unusually slow, and they weren't that fun to watch either. A little creepy, just plain white text scrolling on a black background. I only recognized Ben's name as he was the creator of the show. The rest were people I'd never heard of. The copyright notice at the end said Copyright Cartoon Network Studios 2001, which was incredibly odd seeing how the show was new for 2011. After all that was over, the screen went to static for a split second, during which some incredibly creepy and shocking video clips were shown between static intervals. I can still remember them all very clearly. The first was a picture of a person in a plague doctor outfit. Those always scared me for some reason. And the way the person in the suit was filmed was just as bad. A red light, something that freaks me out incredibly, was shown over the clip. The next was what seemed like a video being played very quickly over and over of a kitten's face being squished by a woman's high heel, which was strange because a so-called friend of mine sent a picture to me yesterday of a cat being stepped on and killed, similar to the kitten in the video. The last one was the one that disturbed me the most and made me want to both cry and vomit my guts out. It was my little brother. Or at least a small child that looked very similar to him, being shot in the face by a person who looked like my father. You could clearly see the child's brains and blood splatter on the wall. I began to sob uncontrollably after the traumatizing clip, so much so that I passed out. When I woke up, my door was unlocked and the television was turned off. I went to call the police on the home phone in my kitchen to report that I had seen some very disturbing things on TV and that my doors had been locked. When they arrived, they could find nothing like what I remembered from earlier this morning. I told my brother about the episode and he fainted. My internet history was cleared and they were angry at me, and just assumed that I had a bad nightmare when I was sure I hadn't. It's a good thing I recorded the episode. The officers were shocked at what I showed them. One of the officers felt bad for me and took me out to a small diner so I could recollect my thoughts. At the diner, I remember my family was out visiting my aunt, and they were supposed to be back by noon or so. It was already 11. So the officer and I drove back only to find a whole squad of police cars and even some government agents at my house. They explained that my little brother was missing and that my mother and father were major suspects. I was freaking out and trying to tell them about the disturbing clip of the boy who looked like my brother being shot in the head, but they wouldn't listen. I stayed with my older brother Larry, who wouldn't believe me either, still insisting that all he saw was an old Looney Tunes cartoon and nothing at all creepy or weird. The cops eventually told me that they could contact Turner Broadcasting and tell them about the incident. A representative of Turner Broadcasting came to my cousin's house to talk to me in private about what I'd seen and experienced that night. He was very kind, but it seemed a little like some sort of front. After I could tell him all I remembered, he agreed to play back that day's programming from when the incident with the disturbing Gumball episode had occurred. To my shock, all that was airing at the time was an old Looney Tunes short. Nothing more, nothing less. I hysterically sobbed and moaned that what I had experienced and seen was completely real, but no one listened. Eventually I discovered that Ben had a Twitter account, so I sent a message about the episode and this was the reply I got. One thing, how in the heck did you find that? I never, ever, ever thought I would think about that old shame again. Don't tell anyone this, Sarah. Yes, that's my name. But the amazing world of Gumball goes back further than you know. I used to have a really boring job as a teen, and I sketched little drawings of the Watersons and friends. The episode you saw was never supposed to be seen by anyone but me and a few friends of mine. It was a very, very awful thing to do, but we made the episode as a joke. A guy from my old job who everyone hated had lost a child to a crazed serial killer, who is apparently still out there somewhere. Anyway, we made it so we could make fun of how he came into work usually, crying like a fool, which is why you saw Mr. and Mrs. Watterson cry so much in the episode. I know, I'm deeply sorry for what I did, which is why I tried to bury that stupid thing years ago. Literally, I went out into the countryside with my mates and dug a hole and buried it. What I don't get, though, is how you describe the blood and guts and stuff. We didn't have any scene with Darwin and Anais' bodies being found. All that happens in the episode is the parents are informed of the kids being found dead and them crying like crazy. We didn't even draw anything in the episode like that at all. We're not that sick. Now, this is my theory. The lunatic who killed the man's child found the tapes we buried, watched it, and heavily edited it. Then he hijacked the local TV station near... I blocked out the name of my city. I'm paranoid enough and it's a small town. Somehow, and got the episode to air on your local Cartoon Network station. Now, why your brother couldn't see it, I have no idea. Why it seems you're the only one who saw it, I have no idea either. Sorry, but I just don't know. Now, for the explanation you have been waiting for, the clips at the end, I don't know. I don't. I'm deeply sorry from the bottom of my heart, but I don't know why those clips were aired. I just don't. I'm sorry, I really am. But me and my mates are just the ones who made those scenes with Richard and Nicole crying. That's it. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so deeply sorry. Best wishes, Ben, and everyone involved with the grieving. Seriously, stay the fuck away from that episode. Alright, so that was The Amazing World of Gumball, The Grieving. Overall, I think that actually was a pretty good creepypasta. Now, there were a few things that stood out to me as far as problems go. One, this might be more of a personal problem, but the part where the main character is trying to turn the TV off, and it's like, oh, like I tried, like none of the buttons work, and it won't turn off even if I unplug it. And I was like, I can't leave the room, everything's locked. Maybe to me it felt a bit out of left field because I can't really see it being explained by anything other than some type of supernatural element. And I feel like a lot of the other stuff has some kind of level of a grounded explanation that you could kind of come up with, you know, like someone airing it on like a small network or something specifically to this person's TV, you know, and someone editing things and stuff like that. But when you get to like, oh, like I can't turn it off and stuff like that, it's like, okay. And it kind of took away a little bit of the immersion there. But I think one of the bigger issues is the conclusion where they imply that, where they state that Ben made something specifically to mock just someone he didn't like because his child was murdered by a serial killer and he was annoyed by how much he was whining about it. Like, I guess it is possible for someone to do something like that, you know, to behave that way, but it's a bit of it takes, I assume it would take like somewhat of like a lack of empathy in order to, you know, hear about someone's child being murdered and just being like, oh wow, you're crying, what a loser. You know, I think that's it's a bit of a jump, you know, it's a bit of a stretch to say, you know, this person did it to mock someone whose child was murdered. That felt a bit like it felt a bit out of nowhere, and it felt a bit unnecessary too, because it could have like the stuff about, you know, them crying could have very easily been explained as like just dark humor, you know, like kind of taking something that looks really cutesy and adding something dark, and that's the joke, you know, like taking something cutesy and adding dark elements, I guess, kind of like Happy Tree Friends or something like that. And I felt that would have been like a better explanation. You know, it would have also been a bit more harmless on the creator's side, because you don't really need to demonize the creator in this story necessarily, because it's implied that the person who made the edits of like adding in the dead bodies and the extra footage is the villain, and that's the person who's the creepy one. So I feel like making it so, you know, Ben just made it as like dark humor as opposed to actively mock someone whose child got murdered would probably be a bit of a better choice. I mean, I feel like the reactions of the characters and the overall mood of it and like the structure of the episode itself was really good. The fact that it ends off with it implied that Gumball was probably the murderer. It sounds silly when I say it, but you know, when they say that the first scene of him standing in the corner, like he wasn't standing there. That was him hanging the whole time, and it's like a dramatic twist. You know, like it's like a sense of like irony or something, where it's like you're faced with something horrible from the start, and you don't even, like, when you're given the full context, it's like, oh, you know, like you realize. I think that part was really good. I really liked that part. Shut up, bastard. A few kind of details here and there that mess with the immersion, but I think overall it's a pretty good creepypasta, especially for a lost episode one. Yeah, overall, I think this is actually a pretty good creepypasta. I think it's deserving of the category it's put in. Of course, there are some issues I have with it, but I think overall it's pretty solid. So I think with that, I might end it. Last time I did like a short story to like, kind of wind things down, but I'm going to be honest, my throat's a little, my throat's not having a good time here, so I think I'm going to just call it here, and maybe I'll make something else again like this later. Probably. I'm having a bit of fun with this kind of stuff, so might as well keep at it. And I guess until then, I will see you in the next video.